So I haven't seen The Mummy in like 15 years, and now I finally decided to sit down and watch it again. And I got kind of a lot of thoughts. Between writing this review and actually getting around to filming it, I actually watched The Mummy Returns and The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And I had a lot of thoughts about them too. So if you're interested, stick around to the end of the video. I'll briefly talk about them and we'll go from there. Also, I can't express this enough. I watched this movie 3 times the first weekend I decided to sit down and watch it again. It's that good. And I'm upset that it took me 15 years to watch this movie again. Before really getting into the nitty-gritty of the film itself, I'd like to talk about the director Stephen Sommers. The only other films I've seen of his that aren't The Mummy is Van Helsing and Odd Thomas. Both of those movies are great in their own right, but they never quite hit Mummy status of awesome. One of my favorite things about Stephen Sommers as a director is not only his really hokey dialogue, but also the way that he's able to incorporate a character's personality into the way that they fight. So you'll see Rick like dual wielding pistols, or he'll just like kick a mummy in the nuts or something silly like that. Or how the mummy Imhotep really relies on his more supernatural abilities to do all of the fighting that he needs done. The way that he composes his action and his dialogue not only help to establish the characters as a whole, but also helps us understand the characters. But it's also incredibly fun to watch. So this remake of the 1932 classic basically follows Evie, who is a librarian in search of some fun archaeological adventures, and her brother Jonathan. They both happen to find a map to the City of the Dead, and so they enlist Rick O'Connell, this dude who's been there before. As the movie goes on, they awaken the mummy Imhotep, who brings plagues and chaos and all kinds of things for our adventurers to fight against. These actors are completely irreplaceable. And yes, I know what happens in the third one. We will get there when we get there. But for now, they're pretty much irreplaceable. Rick O'Connell is the perfect mix of Han Solo and Indiana Jones. He's a super awesome badass, but at the same time, he's incredibly funny. Evelyn is probably one of the most adorable characters I've ever seen in cinema history, ever. It's also really cool if you watch the whole trilogy to see her character go from this very cute and adorable innocent librarian who just wants to find artifacts and such, turn into a complete badass with the same type of motivation. Her brother Jonathan is an adorable treasure seeker. The actor that they picked to play this guy was absolutely perfect. I mean, he had all of these perfect one-liners and delivered perfectly. And I watched the director's commentary, and a lot of my favorite lines that he has were improv. It just works so perfectly. It's like the right amount of cheese. And Imhotep, the mummy, is just a dude who wants love. That's all he wants to do. He just wants to resurrect his love and be together. That's kind of like it. So you can't blame him for that, but like, I don't know, he's also bringing like plagues and stuff. And even the rest of the cast of characters leave you wanting more and more of them. And let's be real for like 2 seconds. If this movie was made in the 40s or the 50s, Benny's character would definitely be played by Peter Lorre. I think what's really cool is that each of the characters are built on an archetype, but these actors and the dialogue are so charming that it's like the perfect version of these archetypes, and it's really awesome to see that unfold. And by the end of the film, they really do feel like you're best friends with them, and you just want to keep hanging out with them more and more, and then you see the following too, but we'll get there. I'd also like to mention Jerry Goldsmith as the music composer. This man has an astronomical amount of work under his belt. I mean, just look at this huge list. And he did such a perfect job combining a 1930s monster horror film with something more contemporary, something a little bit more 90s. And as a result, combining those two really give you something that falls nothing short of timeless. The Mummy is such an easy film to watch, and there's really not a dull moment. Every single scene in the film has moments for every character to not only develop, but shine and exude their personalities. This film really is a wonderful mix of action, romance, comedy, and horror. And I think that because it fundamentally understands what it is and it does everything in its ability to be what it is, really aids in its timelessness and its charm. Now, what really makes this movie charming is it being a product of its time with its CGI. To be completely honest, some of it looks pretty dang good, and then others not so much. And even the parts that aren't all that good still look pretty rad for it being a movie that came out in 1999. Actually, my favorite part of the CGI is how they made the mummies kind of see-through, and you can always see like through their ribs or through their skull to the wall behind them. I think it's a really nice touch. It brings you more into the film, and it makes it more believable. It widely looks like 90s CGI pretty much across the board. However, I think that their intentions and what they really tried to accomplish with it really actually aids in the experience of watching the film. It doesn't really hinder the experience at all. It's kind of like seeing strings lift an actor in a 1950s movie. It's still incredible, and it aids in the immersiveness of the whole experience of the film. I think what really makes this film work and become timeless is its pacing. You spend so much of the film, actually the first hour of the film, the first half of the film, spending time with these characters, seeing how they react in situations, see how they interact together, and then about halfway through is when all the crazy mummy stuff starts to happen. One thing that I actually find interesting, and I would like to make a video going a little bit more into this, that this film, along with other 90s bombastic films like The Mask of Zorro, have taken a formula established by films that came before it and preceded it, and then perfected it. The Mummy and The Mask of Zorro did such a great job at doing what they wanted to do, and then it paved the way for other huge bombastic movies of the 2000s, like the Pirates of the Caribbean, Harry Potter, and other bigger franchises, blockbusters really. I think in some cases, a lot of modern bombastic Hollywood blockbusters try to speed through the film just to hit all of these different checkpoints of the plot and get to the action sooner and make sure the action's really big and bombastic, but that always comes at the expense of the characters and their development and a heightened sense of their personal adventure. A lot of newer movies favor the action over the character development, really. In The Mummy, we get to know and love all of these characters and then see how they react and handle the situation of the mummy coming back to life. Ultimately, I think The Mummy at its core is a popcorn flick, but it's one of the best popcorn flicks that I've ever seen ever in my whole life. It's a party movie. You can put it on when other people are over and no one's gonna complain about it. And if they do, kick them out. The movie knows how bombastic and campy it is, and it plays into that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I think that's part of what makes it so great. And honestly, if you haven't pieced it together yet, I adore this movie and can't recommend it enough. But now it's time for the fun part. Talking about The Mummy Returns and Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And warning ahead of time, I wasn't a huge fan of The Mummy Returns or Dragon Emperor, so because I don't have the nostalgic value of The Mummy Returns, I felt honestly pretty insulted by what they did with these characters. I don't feel like any of the action was specific to any of the characters. I don't think the characters grew any through the action. They were all just very Hollywood badasses, and the fights were very choreographed, which is fine, I guess. In the first movie, because everything was so character motivated and they were kicking mummies in the nuts and doing all these other crazy things, that gives the movie personality, and it's something that I thought the second one was kind of lacking. That and The Mummy Returns, I wasn't too crazy about how they expanded some of the characters' backstories. I thought it was honestly pretty silly. You might as well have told me that Imhotep was their father or something and that they were actually brother and sister. It was silly and goofy. I also feel like The Mummy Returns suffers a lot from bad dialogue. Yes, still it's cheesy and there's some really cute moments in there. The whole is less than the sum of its parts. I felt very disconnected from these characters, and I felt that their child, the kid that Rick and Evelyn have, is neglected throughout the whole movie, which kind of motivates his character in the third one, so I guess that kind of works out. But not only is he neglected, but the family doesn't feel like a family. I just felt like the whole thing was really disconnected. So when the kid gets kidnapped in The Mummy Returns, I don't really care, and nor is really any of their dialogue about them missing their kid really all of that believable. In fact, I think Rachel Weisz, I think is how you say her name, as Evelyn, doesn't really care at all in the movie. You can kind of see that she's just delivering these lines and she does not care. There was a lot of elements going on. If I'm being completely honest, the film would have been better off without the Scorpion King thing at all. I feel like that added a lot of unnecessary elements. It felt like I was watching Spider-Man 3. There was just too much going on in the film. It just kind of felt flat. And then the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I will say that I probably enjoyed that one just a smidgen more than The Mummy Returns. It takes place way after The Mummy Returns, and their kid is all grown up and he's going off on his own adventures, and Rick and Evelyn have calmed down a little bit. She's a writer now and he does something, I don't know. But they're both eager to get back out there, and Jonathan owns a casino, which is cool and fun, but the whole time, I think that where the characters are at isn't necessarily wrong. I just felt like the conflict between the family was kind of just generic. I think they knew that, and so the second it started to get kind of irritating, they knew it was like, okay, let's have the characters be understanding and open towards each other. So that kind of ends the conflict, but it's a nice little setup and payoff. And I know a lot of people think that the CGI in the third one is worse than the first two, but I promise you that's not the case at all. Overall, I think the movies are worth watching, especially if you watched and really liked the first one. It's nice to binge watch the whole series together. And if there's any one takeaway from this, is that the first one is definitely like the best by far. Now, to be completely fair, I still think they're really fun and enjoyable films. They had unrealistic shoes to fill because the first one was so good and then the other two just so aren't. I don't know how I went this far without talking about her. Rachel in the third one was replaced, but I don't think that matters. I come from the land of theater, and every time something is redone or there's a new revival, or sometimes even between shows, you see the characters being played by different people. It's just a different person doing a take on the character, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, nearly as much as people think. I think she definitely cared about doing her best in the role and trying to tell fans, hey, I know I'm not Rachel, but here's my best. And I think we got her best, and it was pretty damn good. I think that a lot of people who have issue with her were really just blinded by nostalgia more than anything else. But I don't know. This is the movie. They're just movies. It's fine. But that's okay. Thank you all for bearing through my review of The Mummy, The Mummy Returns, and Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Thank you guys for watching this video. I greatly appreciate that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but also comment your thoughts so that we can talk. Because a lot of people are going to want to talk and put me in my place after what I said about The Mummy Returns. But that's okay, because I'm always interested in hearing people's thoughts, even if I disagree with them. Because it's just a movie, I think that's kind of something that it's something we lose touch with, is the fact that it's just a movie and it's okay to not like something, or it's okay to like something, and all that jazz. I don't know what to talk about next. I want to review another monster movie. I think that would be fun. But yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate it.